Okay, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. A lot of what I liked or had liked in the theatrical was a moral simulation. This is a lecture on simulations. Last lecture we talked about jobs, how to turn a buck in this, designing the space, designing the context, designing the technology, designing the algorithms that go into an artificial space. This is the most exciting thing about this to me, is turning a larger philosophical idea toward morality, toward ethics, and then seeing how simulations, wherever they might happen, even in terms of a movie, a Hollywood movie, a so-called foreign movie, that was the big name for it back 60s, 70s, 80s, where you didn't have the formulaic sort of Hollywood straight-jacket Aristotelian propaganda stuff in it, which it still has. Um, why do we look at narratives? Why are we sitting around a campfire while the big cats and dogs are picking us off at night? What are we frightened of? What are we risking? What are we forecasting? If this, then this in the future. So there are a number of sort of not rules but simulations we can go through. And simulation in this lecture, I'm trying to explore the notion of the amoral. The we all know what morality is, I think, doing the good. We all know what immoral is, purposely not doing the good. And then the amoral, something that sits outside of morality. Breathing is one of those examples, some amoral act. A tiger hunting for food in the woods and killing something, as opposed to a person who willingly murders someone else. Breathing is interesting because if you try not to breathe, make breathing a moral act, you will fail. Breathing is an amoral act. It's a natural thing. It exists outside of willfully doing right or wrong. You could say, I'm going to commit suicide by not breathing, holding your breath, not hanging yourself, and it would become an amoral act because the organism is rolling into the next moment to preserve this. You would go unconscious and then you'd start breathing again. So this going to the theater, doing projects in immersive environments, doing projects in VR, watching an old Hollywood film, we are fascinated by morality tales. How will we be accepted by the others? How can we prognosticate the future, making right or wrong movements toward the best outcomes in the future, even knowing that, as in the movie, we're all going to die one day. So, what can we do with narrative building that takes an amoral stance outside of the moral and immoral? Excuse me, sneeze. And examines the the amoral, a question like stopping yourself from breathing, being a part of a task that is part of a natural succession, willing and acting in a way that stands outside of consequence, um, and so forth. So we have moral, we have immoral, and we have amoral. These things fascinate me utterly. It's probably why I'm even though I'm a designer of space, I keep going back to actions, will, volition, agency, and the abilities for the human mind to say, oh, that's not really moral, immoral. I had a friend who, saw some pictures on Facebook and said, of a group of us in a group and said, hey, you aren't wearing face masks in public. So he took this as a moral thing that out in public we're not wearing face masks late in the time of COVID in the fresh air and whatever. To me, it was an amoral act of we'd all been triple vaxxed, we'd been this, that, and the other. Yeah, it was better to wear the mask in the fresh summer air, but it's also a hindrance with fogging up of glasses and things like that. So we actually, in this case, we actually do want to delineate between the three states as much as we can. And theater shows, certainly the way the Greeks and Shakespearean committee did so with their society, they want to reflect back to those people reading the codes of morality just what's going on. Here are two things. First thing is after my hometown Minneapolis exploded in public Black Lives Matter protests, buildings burned, so forth, after the murder of George Floyd, which was, whether you say that's moral, immoral, or amoral, it was, there were indicators there that this is pretty much, as the world saw, with the new development of a camera, pretty much an immoral act by someone who is amorally attendant to the badge and then has a job for a paycheck. So it pointed out the need for training cops. This proposal we called Cop College. We interviewed NYPD and they came over to the VR place and we're talking to them about moral situations that they had happened, and all of us have very strong reactions to this. The murder of George Floyd, the use of the police, defund the police for keeping, being the thin blue line, keeping other states of affairs becoming more anarchic, race, class, perceived and real, Hegelian master slave dichotomies, oppression, all of this. We thought to offer a service in simulated spaces to provide an amoral space, a simulated space, to which cops could get training and split second decisions, assuming that traditional methods of training do not work. There's been plenty of work done through the DoD, the endless font of funding, the DoD, for training soldiers in this field in terms of asymmetrical wars since Korea, Vietnam, and maybe even before that, the Boer War. There was difficulty separating combatants from non-combatants. In the case of Vietnam, the war was everywhere and anywhere, through women, through children, and so forth. So a lot has been done with the soldiers. This was a system to look at the police. And then this is a kind of a double-edged thing. Three simulated systems I'm going to cover, hopefully, in this video. The police, devising systems to which they are placed in these rational, logical, but empathetic, dangerous situation in which they need split-second judgment on to use when to use deadly force, guns, tasers, um, things like that. And we devised a system of code in Unity Engine. We're asking bidding for a price to do the project. The other case was through the Casper test, a morality test in conjunction with pre-medical studies at Stony Brook University. How could we simulate certain answers on the Casper test? Um, and how could we simulate certain choices one would have to make as a doctor? Again, much like the police, a question of life or death. Police, doctors. Third one was less life or death, but perhaps no less slow in its working out of its logical conclusion. Um, the status of the student, the status of the university. Um, in my urban design and cognition class for a biomedical engineering class on human computer interfaces, sounds big, it is. We examined the future of the campus as a cognitive device, which means buildings, it means trees, it means a small bandwidth of boys and girls at a rather small bandwidth in terms of age. Is this going to survive the simulated to real spaces of online training? So we have the three: police, doctors, students. So we're making the pitch. Again, this was fully adaptable, economic compact, proven effective. Yes, these seem like platitudes. Similar systems have already been tested with NYPD and positive results. Malcolm Gladwell talks about this in The Tipping Point, I think, with the unfortunate gunning to death of an African national in the Bronx in the late 80s, I think, where suddenly the gentleman's pulling out a wallet and dies under a hail of bullets by 4 or 5 cops as a sort of a contextual misunderstanding up until then. Can we provide these situations that become empathetic and they can understand them? This actual VR set was, as you can see, SWAT. Put the CPU on the back. Nowadays, we can use the Oculus Quest and devise systems to which one could train under understanding levels of empathy that promote humanity, diminish ideas of split second profiling, all those realms between that talk about the difference between pulling a trigger and not, killing someone who's innocent or protecting the lives of self and others. One of the policemen, next gen haptic feedback, unprecedented realism, more than a tickle or a buzz, the Tesla suit is capable of producing feelings of genuine physical exertion. I put this on the Tesla suit. It is not cheap. It is both top and bottom. The pants and the suit are about $15,000. And if you are in a shootout circumstance within the simulated space, usually in Unity Engine, you can feel the place where the bullet enters your shoulder and so forth. It's not just a tickle or a buzz. It's a little more substantial. But it lets you know when you are hit. Um, so further on, the Tesla suit was part of this. The VR situation puts you into this. Big question that this begs is: does this lead you merely to become a phatic, haptic, ludic um, uh, person able to run a gauntlet, as in that kind of underrated Tom Cruise films, The Day After, I think, where he keeps running the simulation against these aliens. Game over, play again. Is this a real means and avenue toward greater empathy or not? Um, yes. So we were trying to establish a sort of a service to people dealing with larger questions of empathy in these fields. Tesla suit, 80 feedback channels per suit. I put this on. I don't have the photo of that. Transcutaneous electric nerve simulation, electric muscle simulation. It kind of sends little electric shocks to you. And again, we made this pitch. We did do a free workshop with the NYPD in the precinct Lower East Side. A cop, we called this Cop College. It was meant in the response to Minneapolis do with the open question: are cops really protectors against general anarchy and violence, or are they a part of the problem? Um, Still a big question, but we were trying to put people in empathetic situations, and I even made the proposal to put youth at risk in the position of the cops and change off and do these workshops between cops and youth at risk and so forth. Um, all right. Does a simulation of amoral, immoral, and amorality lead to a greater sense of morality, which we wish for in our human structures? Um, Detailed and precise, capable of emulating entry and exit wounds. So I felt I was in this. I felt a bullet hit my shoulder, and split second I felt it exit out the back. So that was very interesting when and after I put it on. Weight simulation for full gear scenarios. Lightweight, yeah, it was fairly lightweight. I didn't put the pants on. Battery powered and fully wireless. It is the next in haptic engagement. Of course, you could take this further and think of all sorts of haptic engagements with other human beings around the world mitigated by digital media and networks. But this, to me, is even more interesting than the obvious things of human engagement across distances. It's science fiction alive. The Catwalk Mini, smallest, lightest, portable treadmill. You keep moving and the thing moves around you. Can accommodate users up to 6 foot 4 inches, 286 pounds. Back support allows full range of motion, including running, strafing, sprinting, taking cover, crouching down, picking up items, accurate foot tracking and body tracking. So again, these are infrared things and so forth. So this is a simulation aiming, let's just call it for the sake of a thought experiment, an amoral space, the space of training. You in the university studying whatever curriculum, usually by older professors, is an amoral space. You're taken in, you're racked in your little warehouse, you're supposed to get your A and keep your GPA high. And this is an amoral space that has little to no moral bearing on the life and death world outside in the market world of neoliberal capitalism. Au contraire. As many existential philosophers have said, there's probably no such thing as an amoral space. That is again up for debate. The debates are the interesting part. I hope all of you see this, whether we talk about mask wearing, no mask wearing, vaccination, no vaccination, defunding the police as the line protecting us from total anarchy. These are open questions, and many people gather the facts around them to promulgate their position. But facts flow like a river. Facts keep coming in. And so perhaps we need these simulated spaces. We need the monastic factory model of the university, even though it might be getting obsolete. I have a research direction in architecture, design, theater, spectacle, projected media, now into VR and AR spaces. What, beyond telling pretty little stories like you find in the very rapidly banal, sanitized PC spaces of Amazon, Netflix, Hulu, Disney, and so forth. This is part of the reason why the morality of superhero films are etched in black and white. What equipment do we use, and how can we model ourselves between a moral act, doing the best for the greatest good, utilitarianism, or the self, immoral, willfully transgressing the model of the greatest good for the greatest amount, that's again utilitarian, or amoral, merely following nature's rules or society's rules, or having your action so far back in the chain of causality that it's like breathing. You breathe how many times an hour, and all of this is considered amoral. When we did the thing with the NYPD, a cop came in with an interesting story. There was an unfortunate, homeless, disturbed man who had an episode or was off his meds or was on the streets, Lower East Side. And this is a kind of very interesting story. And he had a box cutter, the sharp razor knives. He was having an episode, melting down, whatever the PC or not PC word for having a violent episode beyond his control, which is also debatable. And so he was going down the street slashing people, causing them to bleed, and no one died, but there was plenty of violence to it. The cops were called. This gentleman was called in from the Lower East Side precinct. He was with a rookie cop. This gentleman had been slashing people down the street, had been slashing himself. Already the morality of, is this in his volition? Does he know the difference between right and wrong? Is questionable maybe in a couple seconds. No, he does not. He's unfortunately disturbed and having a violent episode. No time to be PC about this. You have to restrain him. Otherwise, he's hurting and killing people. So the cop grabbed him. He had a rookie partner. First week on the job, and said, restrain him, get him down. And the rookie saw all this blood around and backed off. It froze. Actually froze in the line of duty. So this veteran cop had to curse him out, go over, restrain this person by physical force. I don't know what it was, sitting on him or flipping him over, or what, neutralizing the box cutter. This cop very discursively said if his rookie had this system to understand these morally ambiguous sort of avenues. The moral ambiguity is this gentleman, moral, immoral, amoral, is again, whatever the PC or not PC term of it is, he's having an episode. He's putting the general public to great danger, and he needs to be subdued. Probably not with deadly force, but it would have come to that very fast. While this rookie cop was sitting on him, and here's the relationship to theater, doctors, students racked away in monastery factories. While he was doing this, subduing the guy and talking his rookie out of it, who had accepted an amoral or the immoral position of not responding to his duty to protect the public, a crowd gathered around him and started photographing him, subduing this gentleman who had been attacking the same public with a box cutter. So we have something similar to Brecht's notion of the street scene. You see an accident, the between two entities, you try very hard to describe it in a very clinical way, but you eventually start talking about moral relations. Um, so that's what this was. Could we devise a system to help rookies, to help veterans, to help even the public, if there's open workshops, to understand what the ramification of antisocial, immoral behavior, or even amoral in the case of this person having an episode. Could we simulate a situation where split second things were parsed out so that each entity could understand what is this? Um, in our system, we have 180 field division without blurring, voice command capability, embedded hand and motion tracking technologies, data privacy, cybersecurity, no information is sent to third party, build an easy integration with duty helmets, and so forth. I've worked with the Muse. The Muse is a EEG reader. I think you had it, Chinese school children having the EEG monitors on their school kids' heads. I had a student who said, "Yeah, my little brother went through this." He said, "This is kind of baloney and intrusive." So all of these technologies don't exist outside in an amoral world. This is probably the meat of the class here is why do we want to see these situations beyond seductive entertainment? I mentioned McLuhan said content is the small piece of meat the burglar carries for the consciousness of the dog while burglaring a house. Um, is it really? Or is the content of amoral or immoral act really that finely of existing in a gray zone? A person cutting people with box cutters, subdued, rookie cop melts down, the audience, the bystanders around this cop sort of melts down. Suddenly, in this quick sequence of time to get this guy, get people out of harm's way, the cop finds himself in harm's way, and every aspect of what he does is scrutinized. So we broke it down as what do you do for preparing a rookie? What do you do in that circumstances that demands he did not use deadly force. He did not shoot the individual. But what also could be done in terms of crowd management to, like Brecht said, what could we do to give the audience an accurate sequence of time if they just came up on this recently? Yes, very different than the incident in Minneapolis during COVID. And we keep forgetting the context. This was exacerbated by COVID. Um, George Floyd went into the bodega with a counterfeit 20, and there were all sorts. It was almost like a Greek drama. The witnesses, the store boy, the owner, the neighborhood, which is very liberal. As I told my friends, this is like Park Slope erupting. It's not like, other places that have a greater tendency toward intolerance. All of these gray zones. From it, we need to extract amoral practice, the simulation. Let's just say that the simulation we find in Oedipus Rex, we find in Hamlet, we find certainly Hamlet, we find in Brecht, we find in a police training thing, is an amoral space that we can stand back, or we have the luxury to stand back and say, this gives us perspective. Can you find that in World of Warcraft or Fortnite or whatever is Sim City, the things that are popular now? Can you run enough simulations so you can live the perfect life? The skits into it talked about before, maximizing and satisficing. When all is said and done, you need to subdue someone who's having a psychotic breakdown. You need to protect the public from that. You are tasked in your job to protect the public from that. Is this is this the right amoral media? And this has happened. Last lecture, I talked about the great Ray Bradbury story, The Veld, where kids, families, nuclear families, had a simulation room in their house. The funniest line in it is it's like the child psychiatrist says, you got to turn your room off. And this piece was written in 1948. That Velt room had some definite moral impacts at the end of the city. Spoiler alert. So let's go onward. Software. Trusted. Space Grant Research Scholar, volunteer software design. Not limited to combat simulations. There are plenty of this VR stuff during the Gulf War, during the Iraq War, to determine combatants from non-combatants. And again, like Vietnam, it led to very morally identity ambiguous sort of situations, not enviable. Flexible, we had to tweak the program parameters for efficient run, third-party simulation software. So that's the bid. We did one workshop. They were interested. COVID and the George Floyd incident came up, and they were interested in retooling the NYPD and then the Black Lives Matter marches, protests happen. I lived in Brooklyn. There's nothing much that went on in terms of property damage. More so in Manhattan, became kind of an obvious context for a class war. Then certain things happen in Manitowoc, Milwaukee, these signs and symbols and um, aspects of doing the moral, which could rapidly become the immoral, as it did in Milwaukee. So that is it for this. The next aspect is hold on. Is my simulating space design thinking. All right. So the larger essay is about simulating moral, amoral spaces, cops, students, doctors. The next assignment, kind of gig, we offered a price for it. We were offered a price of doing the Stony Brook graduation for about $80,000. NYU took it, so they did some aspect of hubs and social VR to hold the graduation in the year 2020. But here's our thing with the cops, students, doctors. The second one was actually working out with the Casper system. Yeah, I've got this down too far. Let's roll it in. There we go. MedXR, finding these moral contextual spaces of preventive, curative, palliative, particularly in terms of terminal diseases, ALS, cancers, other things, and what are the attendant moral, immoral, and amoral attitudes patients, doctors, health providers would have in each specific case. The like breathing as an amoral act is smoking an amoral act. Smoking is often considered an immoral act against your future self in that it is known to cause cancer, yet people do it for many attendant reasons. A lot of them subconscious, a lot you can blame on nicotine, and so forth. But what is the relationship in providing a VR simulated space? And again, we haven't strayed from theater. Oedipus Rex, Hamlet, what's a good Brecht play? Caucasian Chalk Circle. Um, these are three plays in different epochs, which, if you're an attentive audience, you see each as breaking down the simulation of a morality or immorality. Case of Oedipus, we have a leader who is ostensibly created an amoral situation for himself. He didn't know that the man he killed at the crossroad was his father. He had come to the town of Thebes and married his mother, had 4 children by her. There was nothing in this is about the amorality of the subconscious, which Freud famously took and ran with. These are Oedipus Rex. Certainly, all of the Greek audiences watching these are wondering, what does this mean in terms of wanting me to fight the Spartans and the Sparta League, and what does this play show me about the failings of the powerful and gifted and the alpha male Oedipus condemned to the amoral world of fate. So this was working out there. Hamlet is an interesting case in in Elizabethan England, kind of coming up. I think Elizabeth had not yet died, but there was a question after this wonderful flowering under Elizabeth, who ruled 40 years or something, worked on the greatest arts productions most of the world has ever known, mostly in the form of literature. Let's just say, for a case that Shakespeare was a committee, she put together this committee of the brightest writing minds reflecting society. There were deep seated problems between Catholics and Protestants as political systems, as algorithmic behavioral systems, as found in Malvolio. Hamlet is a very reflective piece about legitimacy and illegitimacy. Um, Out of the medieval world, a man returns from studying philosophy at University of Wittenberg, and his uncle has usurped his crown on the death of his father. The ghost perhaps was subconscious, doesn't matter whether we do see empirical ghosts or not. This sets up down in his mind the moral route would be, in the medieval sense, to avenge his father's death and kill his uncle, which he eventually does, or uh, adopt the immorality of either waiting or acquiescing, or adopt the amorality of waiting, acquiescing, and having a wait and see attitude, which he does, satisficing what he knows in his intuition, maximizing all the evidence from that, the collision between the medieval feudal structures of right of royalty and so forth, uh, and eventually his tension, his balance between the moral and the immoral. The amoral keeps pushing you toward the immoral, and the moral. In the end, carnage, because of the collision of these two worlds, the medieval world against the Renaissance logical, rational, elevated world. And it's a wonderful script, fully worked out with the new attitudes of Europe, the new, fresh attitudes of England leaving a pirate state, and entering into a rule of law, a way of logic, and dealing with these conflicts in the drama. Brecht, the Caucasian chalk circle, who's is a real parent? Is the parent the one who takes care of you, or is the parent the one who um, put their DNA in you? This is the working out after the war. It's a telling of an old Chinese morality story, um, when essentially the dichotomy of Solomon, who owns, has, is the guardian, deserves the love of a child. The one who took care of the child, or the one who um, has the DNA. Again, Brecht wanted, unlike the Greeks, and maybe even unlike the Elizabethans, which Brecht did rework some Elizabethan pieces, he wanted to say, this is, and again, in some senses, Brecht wanted to say, let me present you with an amoral world. You can just sit there and watch the world. But unlike propaganda, maybe, as he said, Oedipus was propaganda for paying taxes and fighting wars. I want to present you with a world of where you reflect on it. Most of these people, we want to portray this amoral world, so you can't just sit on your lazy butt, but you guys have the ability to analyze your simulated worlds that have a relationship to so-called real scenarios. Again, this balloons up into our age when we're asking, is our world, our universe, even a simulation? What Baudrillard is a famous French philosopher from the 80s who talks about simulacrum, the four different states of simulacrum, the sign as a relationship to the signifier, the sign and signifier have no relations, the sign and signifier have a skewed relationship, the sign and signifier have absolutely no relationship to each other at all. He used architecture. I think his famous case were some movies that were going on, popular movies. America, the study of Vegas. Is this a simulated royal space, or is this an immoral space designed to take your money? Um, it's no in the first Matrix, the movie, which was all about simulated spaces. It's funny how post Brecht we're talking about these kind of amoral spaces of simulated spaces, but morally we're unaware that we've entered into these spaces, as with Neo, who in the beginning of the movie finds these hacked codes giving the person the viruses, and he finds it between a book on Baudrillard, the great French philosopher, on simulation and simulacrum. So we said we live in a simulacrum, which is this world out here. We cannot but look beyond a filter of what's put on it. It tends to say that our agency is always going to be ambiguous. In a strange way, and I did lecture on this, you probably saw it. The Squid Game, the great Korean show, was dealing square, hyper violent, but dealing squarely with notions of agency, simulacrum, and so forth. Much like we're talking about cops, doctors, students. What's pure information? How can we satisfy with pure information? Most of the people who entered into the Squid Game had somehow been predatorily seduced by credit, something we all feel, oh, just do it now and then in the future. I mean, if we ran, I've created financial simulation spaces as education devices, and everyone on Squid Game could have used these things. Um, but again, in the beginning, I kind of knew that it was the cop's brother who was the puppet master behind it, when he goes to his brother's room, and just like in the Matrix, between the two books, he sees a book on Lacan and Jacques, the French psychiatrist, on which all of them were fascinated with, including Zizek. The imaginary, symbolic, and the real coming out of id, ego, superego of Freud. These states were similar. Most of these people are saying, and then he enters willingly into the Squid Game as kind of a cop parasite to see actually what's going on, and it develops into a complicated thing. There are many, many, many movies on game simulation, and somehow a cop gets intersected here. In the case of the Matrix, the cops are the AI entities within the system itself, to see which flesh unit goes rogue from their harvested sensibilities. Doctors. Squid Game. So the brother is the puppet master, and it ends in a very baroque way, but it is part of this lecture to talk about game structures. Um, Furthermore, preventative, curative, palliative. Each one of these segments has its own attendant morality. Preventive. Do you smoke or don't you smoke? Do you drink in excess? How many drinks do you have a week? All of these things that are ostensibly about numbers, the numbers of resistance you would have towards smoking. I had a grandfather who smoked one or two cigarettes a day into his 90s. These are hidden numbers, and the numbers can be revealed, but the numbers in a simulated space can be turned into a scenario. Add the feature of AI, and you have something else. And this is in popular culture and in science today. This whole idea is ultimately physics, really about numbers. Can we penetrate beyond discussions of numbers to enter into talking about physical reality? Strangely, a couple mathematician friends are going back to the Aristotelian logic square, a square designed for the purpose of not contradicting yourself, but within which creates a simulated space. Preventive, what is moral, immoral, and amoral about this? Immoral against your future self would be to smoke. The evidence is in, but many people do it. Many people think they're beating time, but many people, to bring up the amoral world, have this, Freud pointed it out, thanatic impulse, eros thanatos. You have an erotic sort of drive, libido, desire that works itself out. You also have a thanatic response, which could be the seduction toward um, sex, drugs, rock and roll. Smoking, drinking, anything in excess could be a thanatic response to your future self. Your future self is another entity. So that's the preventive. Curative. Um, we're talking about doctors here. In the next essay, we'll talk about more of these realms. But again, this is kind of a very pithy lecture in that um, uh, simulated spaces could help us out of the amoral. I go to theater for the ideas. I don't like to see chandeliers descend. The spectacle is often bracing, but I like to see a smart, intelligent play of morality on the stage. As it impacts my life, I get to understand aspects of my life I never thought. I do love, I was a product of the great books, so I do love things from Iliad and Odyssey, the Bible, on up until the earliest 20th century. I try to fill in the gaps and read as much. On a moral level, it's there, it's mine, it's usually free if you get it from the library. You can complete an education, an autodidactic education, as Asimov said, is the best that these student warehouses could. The monastery factory warehouse model of the expensive university, which, like the Squid Game, is perhaps like modern warfare and proxy wars, are designed to colonize your reserves in case of war, colonize you to the point of death, sacrifice. These tend not to be amoral zones, these tend to be moral zones. And the more data you get on the exact motives of each, going to have an expensive education, coming out and discovering what is taught in the factory, monastery, warehouse has little to no bearing, not just on the market world, but on the world that has been imbued by the internet. In my other class, I point out that the internet and the city are siblings, born 6,000 years apart, but they condense, they control, they clarify, they find conduits. People like these C words, to increase human intercourse, to increase human diversity, thriving, benefits, stealing, everything that humans provide is found in both these entities. The city as a way to overcoming space, uh, time with space, and the internet as overcoming space with time. There's a question, as Rushkoff said, that we live in the eternal present. So that is something to play down the moral aspect of each of these spaces. If you go to see a production of Hamlet at the Globe and you're wondering what is going on here, it is your time 2 or 3 hours understanding this play, memorizing it, and leaving with some impact. Curative. In the dire case that you or a loved one has cancer, a disease that will take you out if untreated, it demands agency, it demands action, it demands a type of in the moment now decision. No more amoral wait and see, which is the go to position of a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of buck passing. The curative is an intensely moral space, demanding agency, demanding that we not take the immoral or especially not the amoral position because we have no time. People such when Steve Jobs got cancer, people such as Steve Jobs tried all these alternatives first. You're racking your brain with ultimate alive sort of agency. But during these periods of curative work, whether you live or die or gain basically extra years, which is all it is, you do achieve, as the existentialists say, a greater sense of agency. The next one, the palliative. Um, when you have something incurable, what is hope? What is meaning? What is freedom? What is identity? What is agency? Or what were they? This is an intensely interesting area. Now, we do have legal issues with the curative. Curative is maybe the best place for Western medicine, empirical medicine, determining what is going on, what will go on, and so forth. So here we broke these things down, and here's the graph on that of the preventive, the curative as an intensely existential situation, wondering what cure works, and the palliative, providing a space where you can die in dignity, with grace, with a sense of purpose and meaning. Many philosophers and psychiatrists, such as Erik Erikson, talk about the stages of life. Um, Erikson, as an anecdote, had an intense interest in uh, the Black Panthers as an entity who embodied the agency of taking on the injustices that African Americans felt, providing, as in case of Freddie, the Black Panther leader in Chicago who was gunned down by the FBI, had school meal programs for poor white kids and so forth. That these were organizations taking on full agency, full um, uh, recognition of the injustices they've felt, but confronted these other immoral situations, such as being gunned down for um, being a messianic leader type. It's a great movie. Judas and the Black Messiah talks exactly about, I forget his last name, Freddie, the Black Panther leader in Chicago, gunned down in the late 60s. All right, this is it for now. We will take off on that on the next one. See you then.